So the fact that the U.S. hasn't been able to get a deal is not shocking. I'll put it that way. My man, Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. He also has his own Substack right now. Definitely check him out on Substack. And just to nail down the name of it, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, I believe is the name. Yep, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. The man is fantastic. He is one of the best analysts that are out there. You're not going to get him claiming that Russia is about to nuke Ukraine. You're not going to get him saying that the war is going to be over within 3 days. You tend to get really decent analysis from Mark. So, Mark, you are the person I've been chomping at the bit to talk to. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
Jamaro, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. I'm alive. How are you? And my new The Real Politic with exclusive content is on Boosty, which is a Russian version of Patreon to get around the Biden/Trump sanctions regime.
Well, just be clear, it's VOOSTY.
BOOSTY. Yes. Everything is in English. Yes, it was created by Russians. It operates completely with financial systems around the world. Credit cards, banks. Whether in Russia or not. There's no. It lacks the problem with sanctions that anything that uses Stripe like Patreon or Substack or other outlets use. Yes.
Okay, I'll put that in the notes. Good to know. And I'm glad. Okay, good to know. God, those sanctions have been just, those things are a pain in the ass.
They are.
But I am annoyed. Now, I'm going to explain why I'm annoyed, and I want to get your take on this. So, two things are happening at once. One, Russia is making faster progress on the battlefield. You have multiple German magazines that have effectively pointed this out, that quote unquote, the Russians are coming is one of the articles saying, basically, we can't do anything to stop them. We know they're coming. We know they're planning a larger offensive. We can't do anything to prevent this from taking place. The infantry is effectively overwhelming on the ground. And from my understanding, there have been thousands of Ukrainians that have been killed over the last week alone. And Russia's been expanding the pace at which they've been moving. So there's that. On the other side of it, you have what I call a boo-oucher. And a boo-oucher, as I explained to the audience, was a chess term. And it's a move that looks strong in the beginning, but the more you look at it, you realize, okay, that's not as strong as I thought it was. So Ukraine goes on a terrorist rampage, attacking multiple trains, Bryansk, I forget the other two, but you can give us an update on those. But they also planned, I guess, for 15 months for this kind of drone attack at various airfields throughout Russia, including hitting some of the nuclear assets in Russia, meaning the planes that were carrying nuclear missiles. Now, these were bombers that were hit. In the beginning, the report was 40, planes have been taken down. From my understanding, it's only been 9. Now, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong. Let's start there first. What do we know so far about the attack?
Okay, so first of all, there's 2 separate attacks, and I know we've talked about this before, and many times I have said that as the Kiev regime and its Western backers get more desperate, and they are less and less able to stop or even slow down Russian forces on the battlefield, they will increasingly turn to dirty tricks. Right. And this is exactly one example of that. Now, we have been told openly by the Ukrainian sources, right? This was done by the SBU. They're quite open about this. It took them 18 months to plan this, right? So this was long in the works. This is the culmination of 2 years of resources and work. I hope it was worth it, right, for them. Because that was, obviously long planned. Obviously, a Russian intelligence failure that they didn't get word of it and stop it. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. Do I believe that this happened without Western intelligence knowledge and almost certainly backing? I mean, the New York Times told us that the CIA came in and rebuilt the SBU from the Kiev regime's military intelligence from the ground up, and that they are our baby, right? That entire floors of the SBU building. So no, of course, the U.S. intelligence knew about this. Almost certainly had their hand in the planning of it. And that's while this fiction of negotiations that the Trump administration did. While this wasn't 18 months, I believe that the timing in which it was enacted is part of a pressure campaign to force Russia to accept the ceasefire that Trump is pushing, that the Kiev regime desperately needs on the battlefield, right? That's the whole purpose, to buy them time, to shove more arms and weapons, to allow them to forcibly conscript more people off the street like dogs, right? That's the whole purpose. Just like last week's big drone swarm attacks that were by and large unsuccessful, right? They targeted Moscow. They targeted, a number of cities around Russia. They fired hundreds of drones each day, or but actually most of them were during the day. They weren't even at night. And yes, Russia reciprocated with their own drone and missile strikes that were by and large much more effective because, well, the Kiev regime has no air defense worthy of the name left, and Russia has a very solid, interconnected, integrated, complex, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare system. And simply the Russian drones as well carry larger payloads. They're now, even the Garans are jet powered and use some machine learning for targeting and guidance, so that they're far more formidable than, shall we say, the drones assembled from Chinese parts that the Kiev regime is using. So that's the purpose, right? I believe that ultimately the timing on which it was unleashed is about pressure for Russia to accept the ceasefire. Of course, it's not going to work. It's not. In fact, if anything, it would have, I would think, the opposite effect. It's not going to achieve that result. The other, of course, is narrative, right? To drive the headlines. We're still in the fight. We're striking back. We're achieving dramatic results. And to be fair, I mean, there is some drama involved in it, right? I mean, this sounds like the plot of a James Bond villain, right? Cargo container trucks full of drones that fly out on command and attack Russian airfields. It sounds like some type of movie plot. Give them that much credit for accomplishing it and originality. Then that becomes the question of the damage assessment, right? So first, let's talk the bridges. Okay, so first off, so the bridges that were destroyed were in Kursk and Bryansk region, although there has also been word that I haven't been able to confirm yet about also a bridge attack in Melitopol, but we'll believe that. We'll concentrate on Kursk and Bryansk. Okay, so attacks on bridges are not an act of terrorism. Bridges are legitimate military targets. These bridges were at least, they had multiple duties. They were used for civilian and economic purposes. They were also used for military purposes. And in that respect, they were, if Russia wants to call them blanket terrorist attacks, that is on them. As a military analyst, I don't consider that. Russia and the Kiev regime have both blown up lots of bridges in this conflict. However, it appears that at least one of those bridges was blown up right as a civilian passenger train
Yes.
was coming forward over the bridge. Now, that's a different story. That is something that warrants investigation about, the knowledge and the timing of such a thing. Of course,
waiting for it.
Yeah, waiting for it. I believe it probably almost certainly was intentional. Of course, trying to prove that in the middle of a conflict is something that can't and won't be done. That certainly elevates that to another level. That does, right? That is a very different story. But so that might be legitimate to call that particular strike a terrorist attack, right? If it was done, as it almost certainly was, with the intention of deliberately killing civilians on a civil passenger plane, if the timing was scheduled for that. But it is the middle of a conflict, and that's what are you going to do? That we're never, almost certainly never going to know, and if it is, it's going to be lost in war, and that's what happens. But again, dirty tricks in that regard. And it must be said that Russia is making advances in the north, right? They are assembling troops, right? They are pushing down. Putin has ordered the creation of this buffer zone to prevent further incursions on the ground into Kursk and Bryansk and Belgorod, right? All across the northern Russian-Ukrainian border there, but also to prevent long-range drone strikes that are at just within the range limit of hitting Moscow, right? That's also part of the idea of the buffer zone, is to push drone and potentially missile attacks back further, right? Out of range of that. So there's reasons on the ground and reasons in the air for the creation of the buffer zone. And if Russia is creating that buffer zone, of course, the Kiev regime is going to try and slow down the logistics of the troops involved in that. So that was the first part of the day. And then we received word about these drone attacks. Now, there have been before this multiple small drone attacks at air bases in Murmansk before, right? In other places in Russia that the Kiev regime should not have been able to get with drones. And previously there has been the question, were they operated out of adjacent NATO territories?
Finland,
yes. The Baltics, right? Other drone attacks in the south, in the areas of Ryazan and Kazan, where they launched out of Kazakhstan. There was an open question there. And then another suggestion has been that drones were being fired from within Russia, that there was essentially, DRG teams, right? Intelligence teams on the ground with trucks, and they were hiding the drones. And there was just last week a case where one of these trucks was caught, just last week. Whether that truck would have been involved in this attack or not, I guess we'll find out in the coming days. I think it's possible. Yeah. We know that multiple other trucks were planned to be involved in this attack and were stopped, at least in one place, by civilians.
Really?
By a civilian person who thought the truck was suspicious. In a couple, at least one, I believe, possibly two other locations. When the hidden roof of the truck popped off and the first drones, and these are for the most part little FPV drones, right? They're not huge. These are not combat drones. This is all very jury rigged. Again, kudos for being innovative.
It's imaginative. Yeah, give them credit. Yeah.
Civilians in the area stopped some of these attacks. They were throwing rocks into the trucks to prevent more of the drones from taking off. So, the damage actually could have been higher without the heroic action of Russian civilians in the area, seeing what was going on and trying to do whatever they could to stop them. And this was dangerous because they then let off self-destruct devices in at least one of those trucks whose drones was prevented from going off, which caused an explosion. So we'll probably get some more details of this. They're coming out, even as we're speaking, we're getting some details. But we do know that there were attacks on at least 5 Russian air bases. One in the far north in Murmansk, Ivanova and Ryazan regions in central Russia, and the Irkutsk region in Siberia, and a base in the Amur region in the far east. Right. So, certainly not within any type of regular range, very, very widespread. And what they were specifically after is Russia's strategic bombers, right?
Yes.
In particular, the 295s and the 222Ms. And also there was a fairly rare and valuable A-50 early warning and control plane, of an AWACS type, right? Not exactly equivalent, but similar idea that was possibly hit as well. Now, the Kiev regime is making claims that some 40 aircraft were damaged or destroyed, right? Not impossible, but I would say unlikely that it's that high. I have seen video evidence of 4, particularly 295s, being hit. Now, it also must be said that not all of those hit were necessarily destroyed. For an aircraft as big as a 295, some small FPV drones, I saw wings catch on fire in 2 occasions. I would venture that up to 5 295s were probably damaged or destroyed with, we don't know exactly. I would say maybe 1 or 2 destroyed, the rest damaged, but repairable. It's important because Russia no longer makes the 295s, right? They're in the process of developing the next gen of a strategic bomber to replace that. So, it is a blow. And it is also must be said that this is another attack on what doubles, right? These bombers can be used for purposes. They are used to launch conventional missiles, but they have been in this conflict. So they're certainly legitimate targets. But they can also be used to launch nuclear weapons, right? They're part of Russia's nuclear triad. So that at a strategic level is I don't want to say unprecedented attack, because we have seen attacks on Russia's strategic capabilities before in this conflict. And it is, no matter what, no matter how much damage was done or not, and I assume it's not as much as the Kiev regime claims, and it's not as little as some on the Russian, side hope. Somewhere almost certainly in the middle, it's still bad, right? It is still an accomplishment for the Kiev regime, and a failure for Russian intelligence. And it once again is going to bring up, we've seen attacks on far spread Russian airfields before in this conflict. And the question once again is, why are there aircraft being parked anywhere not in fortified structures, fortified hangars, underground, above ground, whatever? I know it's a tall order, but when you're dealing with such valuable aircraft, right, the resources should have been, no matter where, because obviously the Kiev regime can reach anywhere in Russia. I know it's hard. There's an incredibly large border. Millions of former Ukrainian citizens are now citizens of Russia. And undoubtedly, there is some penetration of the Kiev regime's intelligence within that. Even before the conflict started, even before 2022, there were millions of Ukrainians who live and work in Russia and have and continue to do so. It's not something that can easily be, filtered out. There's always going to be problems with it. You say, how do you stop it? Ultimately, you get rid of the Kiev regime, right? And even after that, it'll probably still continue in some guerrilla style for a time after that. You can tighten things. You can and should build fortified enclosures, even for the biggest, but the most expensive of aircraft, wherever they are hangared in Russia. And so, some people in the military will and should answer questions about that. Ultimately, is it going to change the course of this conflict? No. The damage was not, I mean, they spent a long time preparing for this, and it was at least partially successful. Not as successful as they wanted, but they obviously, there were some things stopped quite evidently at 2 of the air bases. All of the drones were stopped by existing Russian defenses for those bases, air defense, electronic warfare. Not one got through. But for a final tally, we'll have to wait for a couple days, and it will come out on the Russian Telegram channels. I'm quite sure there's enough of them that are cognizant and will be critical of the mistakes that were obviously made by the Russian military that may have contributed to allow this to be at least partially successful. But the question is now, to me and to a lot of people out there, obviously the West, certainly the CIA knew about this, however they had their fingers in it, whether we'll find out or not, we don't know, but it puts a whole lie to the actual intent of the so-called, peace negotiations being pushed by the Trump administration, right? As if they're third party.
And just to interrupt real quick, Axios initially came out and said that Trump was told. And then after the fact, CBS was like, oh, Trump didn't know anything about it. And so they pulled that part of it. And I'm like, dude, it took 18 months. And you're trying to tell me that, meaning
they brag that they own the Ukrainian intelligence, that they rebuilt it from the ground up, that it's their baby. But we didn't know that. Yeah, okay, whatever. Right.
It's like Trump is always apparently either unaware, untold, doesn't read, or doesn't know about what Ukraine is doing, but knows everything about what Russia is doing. And then this is like, oh man, I didn't know anything about it. And just to go after Russian media for a bit, they are doing everything in their power in the most annoying way possible to separate what Zelensky is doing with Trump, which is aggravating to me. And even when I see some of these people on social media who is like, Trump should pick up the phone and call Putin, which set me off yesterday. And I'm like, why? They're acting as if Trump is a mediator. Like they've drunk this Kool-Aid in believing that Trump is a mediator and he's just out to lunch. And Zelensky in Ukraine has gone rogue. They've missed the plot. He is a belligerent.
There are increasingly a lot of Russian voices that are really angry and disgusted with the Kremlin even going through the pantomime of these peace negotiations. And there are diplomatic reasons why I consider, why the Kremlin, might want to continue going through this, even if they stand firm, which I believe they will, and nothing comes out of it at the end. This is a war of diplomatic and PR maneuver that is happening with these negotiations. But it has to be said, there's a lot of people within Russia that are just like very annoyed and very frustrated with even the pantomime, even going through the motions of this, particularly after this, it was to a significant degree at least a partial success and a failure for Russia that it was gotten through, and it will create. Again, it will continue to foster the image that Russia's not winning this war, right?
I am deeply
hear that reiterated by so many people still. And Kiev regime is still in the fight. Well, they are, but increasingly, I mean, on the battlefield, last week in 7 days, Russia took 18 settlements in the Sumy region, right? That it speaks, when you are aware of the progress of how much faster Russian forces are moving and how badly stretched out and how incapable and undersupplied the Kiev regime forces are in the battlefield. That's why it becomes ever more important in this narrative and politics driven regime, that the West in that regard is fully involved in maintaining that. I've seen multiple comments, right, that like with the Kursk incursion, the Kiev regime score important narrative victories. Well, if only narrative victories won a war. Well, they're not going to win this war. I mean, there was, who was the official? Was it Pearl Wolfowitz, something from the first Bush administration that said,
Paul Wolfowitz,
yeah, we create our own reality, right? Speaking of the narrative, that is where both the Zelensky proxy regime and the West are at this moment. They are maintaining a fictional narrative and hoping that simply repeating it and insisting on it will make it real. I don't believe it will. Maybe there's some countries that whose domestic political structure, their society would break under that kind of pressure, but Russia is too well insulated by the media, the Cyrillic language, a whole number of things that the Russian population is not as susceptible to that type of narrative manipulation and narrative management.